And we're back on a Friday, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Friday evening here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Now again, a movie anniversary that I should have known by heart, I should have memorized, and I did not know. I was not aware until earlier today when going through Instagram that today marks the 50th anniversary of the theatrical release of Steven Spielberg's adaptation of Peter Benchley's massive runaway best-selling novel, Jaws. Now, in the career of Steven Spielberg, he's a very interesting character outside of the unbelievable levels of success. He did not take the conventional route of his peers, Brian De Palma, who went to Columbia, Martin Scorsese, who of course went to New York University, Francis Ford Coppola, who went to UCLA. Spielberg didn't really do that. He kind of dipped his feet into the academic waters of college, but he really didn't graduate. He made films, and he impressed the hell out of people with just how ingenious he was, how brilliant he was. And the film that he did a number of years ago, Capturing the Fabelmans, which is more or less the story of himself and his family. His father, the real life Steven Spielberg's father, Arnold, he would have had his own Wikipedia page if Steven Spielberg had sold shoes. The father is one of the most intelligent men in the world at the time, and he helped to develop computers. He worked for Digital Equipment at the time that Ken Olsen and others were starting to get the ideas together, how they could actually build what they thought was a supercomputer. The thing weighed 500 pounds, and you have something nowadays that weighs half of an ounce that was more powerful than that. But Arnold Spielberg was literally a genius. He couldn't figure out how his son was achieving certain shots. He did not understand how could I not understand how my son did this, but he just intrinsically knew how to do it. Steven Spielberg had the magic. There were things that he was capable of with the camera. There were concepts that appeared in his head that you just said to yourself, this was a gift from above. There's no other explanation. How did he know how to shine the light at that angle to make it look like gunshots? How did he? He just knew. So Spielberg got the job from big hitters, Sir David Brown and Richard Zanuck. Those were the point people behind the production of Jaws, and the head of MCA Universal, whose name I brought up in the Michael J. Fox episode because he very nearly insisted that Back to the Future not be called Back to the Future, but be called what? Spaceman from Pluto. And it was an old school bluff from Spielberg that managed to push Sid Sheinberg off his conviction that this movie has to be called Spaceman from Pluto. Well, Sir David Brown, was already held in such high esteem that when he handpicked Steven Spielberg would work for Rod Serling, that was really his big break. He directed a few episodes of Rod Serling's Night Gallery, including working with none other than Joan Crawford. He then directed a feature called Duel, which was a TV movie in the United States, but was released theatrically in Europe and did quite well with Dennis Weaver. It has elements of Jaws. It's about a motorist who ends up getting into a weird duel with what appears to be a truck driver who just decides he wants to bump him off. And then Spielberg did a really solid comedic thriller chase movie called The Sugarland Express. And it was The Sugarland Express that convinced Zanuck and Brown. This is the guy that we want to direct Jaws. He does not make movies like anyone we've seen. And what Pauline Kael, the famous film critic from The New Yorker, said about very young Spielberg, he makes movies like somebody who has never seen a stage play. He does not think in terms of the proscenium arch. He thinks in terms of cinema. And there isn't anyone else, that she had seen up to that point, that she felt was just purely thinking in terms of cinema. The freedom of movement of the camera, because he never for a second imagined mounting it on a stage or a stage production. So Spielberg got the gig, and although the legendary Hollywood producer Robert Evans didn't have anything to do with Jaws, he was busy with Chinatown, he was busy with The Exorcist, He had worked, meaning in the past, and he was preparing Marathon Man. But Robert Evans had a quote about the movie business, which is it's worth bringing up. How rare it is to get everyone you want for each important role. When you think in terms of who do we want for this. Robert Evans said only one time in his entire career did he get everybody he wanted, and it was Marathon Man. He wanted Dustin Hoffman for the lead, he got him. He wanted Jaws' own Roy Scheider to play Dustin Hoffman's brother, he got him. He wanted William Devane to play the FBI agent, or CIA agent, the division it's called. They got him. He wanted Lord Laurence Olivier to play Christian Zell. He got him. He wanted Mark Keller to play the femme fatale. He got her. Well, in the movie Jaws, they decided, well, we think that Roy Scheider works for Chief Brody. They got him. Lorraine Gary was the wife of MCA Universal head Sid Sheinberg, so that was a pretty easy maneuver. They wanted the young, up-and-coming new star, budding superstar perhaps, in Richard Dreyfuss to play Matt Hooper. They got him. And they wanted Robert Shaw to play Quint. Now, Spielberg had toyed with the idea, and depending on who's telling the story, he actually was going to cast a guy I love, Sterling Hayden. Sterling Hayden, who famously plays the general in Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove. And a decade before that, he plays the title character in Johnny Guitar, one of the wackiest Westerns ever made. I mean, that movie is really effed up. But it ended up not being Sterling Hayden as Quint. It ended up being Robert Shaw about a year and a half after making The Sting and just crushing that performance opposite Robert Redford and Paul Newman. So they got exactly who they wanted for the principal characters. Even Murray Hamilton, a kind of somewhat obscure supporting actor from the 60s, was in two fantastic films, one more famous than the other. He's in Robert Rossen's The Hustler. He plays a pool shark who goes up against Paul Newman's Ed Felson in the world of that film. And then a couple of years later, he plays a really creepy role in John Frankenheimer's Seconds, and his scenes with Rock Hudson are very nerve-wracking and unsettling because he plays a character who's been dead for years. But here he is, talking and walking and moving around like everything is fine. You don't recognize me because, well, I'm not going to spoil that movie. But Murray Hamilton as the mayor is actually a key component in this film. And it's the sort of thing where you kind of applaud the actor for giving a great performance. The character is so unlikable. And unfortunately, whether it's 1975, whether it's 2025, the idea between money and safety. You look at Jurassic Park. And the joke is, how could they have made any more Jurassic Parks after the first one? After the complete deadly clusterfuck? Why would they ever even mount another park? Because, in the immortal words of the old sportscaster Russ Salzberg, it's all about the do-re-mi. If you see an opportunity to make money, not that you don't care if people die, but you kind of don't really care if people die as long as you get the do-re-mi. And in the world of the movie Jaws, it's not quite as craven as that. But Amity Harbor, in the world of the film and in the book, they need, like, the tourist trade is not an incidental thing. It's not, well, maybe we'll get some tourists. They count on the tourist trade this time of year, whether it's Memorial Day, whether it's 4th of July weekend. This is critical to the function of the town. And Murray Hamilton as the mayor, you can see that he is more of what would be referred to as someone who acts badly as opposed to a bad actor. I don't think that he is evil. I think that he believes he doesn't have any choice other than to just push forward and let's just keep the beaches open. And if the cost is a couple of dead kids, oops. But he would never put it that way. And he has one moment of kind of a come to Jesus moment, if you will, where he realizes the true horror of what's gone on because his kid was there. It could have been his kid. So Roy Scheider as Chief Brody in the lead is he's just one of those dependable actors who was almost incapable of not being authentic or not giving everything he had, whether it was with Gene Hackman in The French Connection 4 years earlier, or the next year in a very surprising role opposite Dustin Hoffman in Marathon Man. That's top 10 greatest cinematic thrillers ever made. And Scheider, he's not in as much of the movie as you think, but he is dynamite in that film as Dustin Hoffman's brother, Doc. He goes by Doc, great name. Just to hear Dustin Hoffman scream, Doc! It's almost like Doc Brown, right? But he's not really a doctor, he's just known as Doc. But Jaws is one of the handful of movies which changed the business. And that is not an exaggeration. That is not trying to, reshape history in a certain way. Jaws is one of the films that changed the business. And to be more specific, the movies that I would say, if I'm asked the question, name films that changed the culture of Hollywood, that changed the way the movie business was run. Well, in the late 60s, with the production code ending and the rating system, which, as I said before, it was 3 steps forward and 2 steps back, but it was a step in the right direction because it meant that filmmakers at least could make their movies more realistic with language, with sex, with violence, and films such as Arthur Penn's Bonnie and Clyde and Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch pushed the envelope and were movies which were rated R, because there was no rated R, there was nothing. When Alfred Hitchcock made The Birds, that's not an R-rated movie. There were no ratings whatsoever. So those films changed what you could put on screen. What films like The Exorcist and then in 75 Jaws did was it changed the process for executives. Because before, in most cases, films did not just blanket hit all the big markets with a massive release where it's in 1,000 theaters or whatever the number is across the country. There was usually a staggered release pattern to see which areas might be softer than others before they would focus. I mean, it's pretty logical the way that they used to do it. But this was the first summer movie season of what we know now, which is that opening weekend is everything. And Jaws had the built-in audience from people who had loved Peter Benchley's novel. My father read the book. He was a big reader. He had an incredible collection of softcover fiction books. Never read hardcover. It was too bulky. They were usually too bulky to put, into a briefcase, for example. But he often commuted by train, and he read a lot of best-selling novels, which ended up being sometimes shitty movies, but oftentimes this level where great book, movie is better or just as good. The Firm, many people of my generation remember, there was a point in 1991 that everyone was reading John Grisham's The Firm. You go on a train in 1991 in the summer, and in every car, 6 or 7 people were reading it, and they were reading the hardcover. Dad, aren't you going to read The Firm? It's not in softcover. I'll wait. And then the movie came out a couple of years later. But the built-in audience and the trailer, the full theatrical trailer for Jaws, I would argue that it gives a little bit too much away, but the theatrical trailer with the narrator saying something to the effect of, it is as if God created a perfect killing machine and gave him Jaws. I'm sure that scared the crap out of audiences of the day. And the kind of argument that I like to have, I personally don't find Jaws to be scary. John Williams' music, incredible. And I talked about Superman 2 yesterday. There's a John Williams iconic score. If I have to say, what are the 5 best John Williams scores? I think the standard answer is Jaws, Superman, Star Wars, Indiana Jones. I would say those are the first 4. Some people might put Jurassic Park as 5th. Some people might say Home Alone. I might say The Witches of Eastwick. But his ability to create not only memorable tunes, but memorable tunes which suited the particular story. The Jaws theme would not work for Star Wars. Spoiler alert, it wouldn't work for Superman. It sure as fuck wouldn't work for Indiana Jones, the Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom. Wouldn't work for any of those. And it wouldn't work for The Witches of Eastwick, which does have elements of horror and menace, but also whimsy. There is very little whimsy in John Williams' score for Jaws. So everything kind of came together. And there were certain decisions which had to be made with regards to the book. And another thing I love talking about and kind of arguing with, you can't film a book. The first Harry Potter movie came very close to almost having the entire book. It would be more condensed, but the major beats of the book, almost all of them are in the first Harry Potter movie. And then as the movies went along, they were all so dense and so there were so many different things going on that they had to do different things. They had to kind of create different avenues to go down. They couldn't simply follow. It would be a miniseries. It'd be a miniseries. But one subplot from the book, which did not make it into the movie, and you understand why, because this particular story is focused on Chief Brody and what Roy Scheider, as the police chief, is going through. A guy who's living on an island and doesn't like water. It's kind of funny out of context. The guy, he looks like he likes water. He's got a nice tan. Roy Scheider, very fit looking dude. But the character of Hooper has an affair with Brody's wife in the book. Now, I love Richard Dreyfuss. I'm a huge fan. I think he should have won the Best Actor Oscar for his turn in Mr. Holland's Opus. And I love Nicolas Cage too. But I feel like what Dreyfuss does in Mr. Holland's Opus is the best work in his entire career. I think he didn't win in part because they felt that what Cage did in Leaving Las Vegas was enough. And Dreyfuss had won his Oscar, which should have gone to John Travolta for Saturday Night Fever. Dreyfuss won for The Goodbye Girl. Really good movie. I would say that Marsha Mason kind of outdoes him. She got a nomination. Where was her Oscar? She didn't win. But Dreyfuss has that, even in this movie, which is very serious. He has a comedic side to the character of Hooper. He's very capable, and he kind of has issues with Robert Shaw's Quint. But it wouldn't work. The movie would have been like a 3-hour movie if you have to stop for an extra subplot where not only is Brody going to get fired, because, dare I say, they're going to blame him for the beaches not being closed because however you look at it, it's all negative. Everything with the town is negative. But you can't just stop the movie so that Richard Dreyfuss, with that rat-tat-tat laugh that he's famous for, starts hooking up with Brody's wife. No, that was a good decision to get rid of that. And you focus on the townspeople's growing panic, the chief trying desperately to convince the mayor, bro, we got to close the beaches. And not only do we have to close the beaches, we have to hire somebody to kill a shark. We can't allow this to continue. And it is a great white, the titular shark. I don't think that, when I was a little kid, the first time this movie played on HBO, it was a number of years after it hit theaters. And there were revivals. I always say this sort of stuff for the young people, and by young in this case, I just mean under 40. There was a time until VHS caught on, the only way to see a movie was in theaters, or if it happened to be airing on a television station at a particular time. And this was why when HBO and cable became a thing in the mid-70s, this was, to my father and people of his generation, this was the greatest thing ever. You're telling me that I get to watch a movie like Jaws in the comfort of my own home, only 9 or 10 months after it was in theaters? In the case of Jaws, it was longer than that. But that was quantum leap forward. That was mind-blowing. My dad kept thinking that HBO and Cinemax were going to be a scam because he couldn't intellectually, it wasn't tracking. There's no way this is what they're saying it is. But in that instance, they weren't selling him a line of BS. That's what it was. But the first time I saw Jaws, it was probably around 1980, 81. And I was a little bit scared. I didn't take it. Now I see the film as more of an adventure story. But if you look at it, if you break it down into its components, I thought that Jaws was the nickname for the shark, that they were just calling it Jaws or something like that. But I was little and I was really nervous and scared watching this movie. But the shark in particular, there are times in life, there are times in cinema where things happen that appear to be bad, but ultimately they prove to be as if it was divine providence. Spielberg's intention, he was going to show the shark a lot more than we end up seeing the shark in the film. We see a lot of the fin, right? We see a lot of the fin, but we don't see that much of the actual shark until the latter portion of the movie. And the joke is, the more you look at it, the more it looks like a rubber shark and not an actual shark, because it was not an actual shark. Spoiler alert, it was made from rubber. And there's a great picture of Spielberg hanging out inside the jaws of the shark. But the reason why they didn't use as much shark, where they were able to, operate the fin, they couldn't get the mechanical shark to work properly. And this is the problem with old school animatronics, even Legends, although he didn't work on this, guys like Phil Tippett and Stan Winston, there were certain things that in the 70s, the tech wasn't quite where it should have been. And there was one shot in the film. It's the shot right before, I think, we're going to need a bigger boat, where Roy Scheider has they call it a chum bucket. He has that stuff and he's throwing it out there to try to get the shark to surface. They could not get the shark to surface properly. The thing kept malfunctioning. It over and over. And I think they wasted an entire day shooting this one thing, like a Kubrick thing, where he does 300 takes of Matthew Modine looking at Arliss Howard and going, hey, what are we, lost? And Kubrick spends all day doing take after take after take, and then I got to come back the next day and do that one beat again. In this case, they simply couldn't get the shark to work. And Roy Scheider was just getting increasingly frustrated because he's hitting his marks and the fucking shark isn't working. And Richard Dreyfuss in the documentary, which was on the kind of collector edition DVD I got about 20 years ago, he says it got so bad that when we were on set, we would hear somebody on the PA system either saying, well, he said almost every time we heard it, it was, the shark isn't working, the shark isn't working. And then every now and then you would hear, the shark is working, which meant, everybody get to your fucking marks because we're going to have to start shooting. We got this thing to work finally. So they didn't know when it was going to work. They nicknamed the shark Bruce, which I thought was great, Bruce. They couldn't get Bruce to work on command. They couldn't get the tech to fire the way it was supposed to. The way, for example, the animatronics in Jurassic Park. Hell, the animatronics years before that in James Cameron's Aliens, which was only shot about 10 years after this. And James Cameron was able to get that to work as if it is a living, breathing alien creature. I don't know how he pulled that off, but the tech had advanced enough a decade later where he was able to do that. And if you don't know what you're looking at, that thing sure as hell looks real. It doesn't look like a rubber alien. It looks like a dripping, drooling creature. So Spielberg, that is, okay, we're not going to show the shark as much. And it turned out to be an ingenious stroke of good fortune, not bad luck at all, because of the fact that the menace of the fin and John Williams' music, never knowing when the shark is going to attack, when or where the shark is going to attack. And the film makes good use of, there's a false alarm, which is a famous scene. And there's that incredible shot of Roy Scheider where it's almost a vertigo, like a Hitchcockian vertigo shot. Well, critics and audiences love this movie. This was not the sort of thing, well, it was a big hit, but it wasn't really that good. The critics raved about it. What an incredible adaptation of Benchley's book. And audiences of the day loved it. And then people saying, I'm never going to the beach again. That was a thing. There were people who stopped going to the beach after seeing Jaws, at least for a time. Hey, Blair Witch Project? Guess who's never going camping ever, ever, ever under any circumstances, no matter fucking what? Me. Not like I was big on camping anyway, but after Heather Donahue screaming Josh at the top of her lungs for the last 10 minutes of that film, no, thank you. I'm all set here. I'm never going camping. There are people, though, who's, yeah, you know what? I'm going to sit this one out. Maybe we'll just go to the pool. I don't really have any need to go swim, in the ocean. It's fine. Let's just do something else. Maybe we'll go to a water park, something where we know for 100% certain there's no shark. So Jaws was just a crazy level of box office hit. And the thinking of Hollywood changed from the old school mindset of let's try it in select cities, we'll have a staggered release pattern, to we're going to bludgeon audiences, we're going to put our best foot forward, we're going to start to flood the marketplace with our big blockbuster films, and let's just go take our chances from there. And it didn't take very long for that to become common practice. It wasn't like, it took years for that. No. By the early 80s, opening weekend was almost everything. It was almost game, set, and match. And they did a sequel, Jaws 2, which my father liked. It's not nearly as good as the original. And some people even to this day will say the shark appears so much that it almost becomes funny. And it's not supposed to be funny. In that film, though, the director, Jean Swarzak, I think was pronunciation of his name, he saw it as an adventure story. He thought the first one was, in fact, more of a horror film. He saw it as an adventure story, Jaws 2. Jaws 3, despite having a really good cast, it was Jaws 3D is what it was called, Dennis Quaid and Leah Thompson, not good. And then OMG, Jaws the Revenge in 1987. Michael Caine didn't even get to pick up his Oscar for Best Supporting Actor for Hannah and Her Sisters because he was in St. Croix working on Jaws the Revenge. What a terrible movie. You have Michael Caine, Sir Michael Caine, and Mario Van Peebles in the same film, and it's not even watchable. You've done something way wrong. Now, unlike other franchises, which one movie's good, the next one's terrible, but they keep pumping them out, Jaws the Revenge was it. That was the end of the initial run. Although Jaws 3 doesn't really connect. Jaws 4 kind of, because Lorraine Gary comes back and her motivations are just demented, that she thinks the same shark that Roy Scheider blew up in the first movie and they killed in the second movie, the same shark is now coming to get the rest of her family. Well, how would that work? Yeah, even Roger Ebert made a joke in his review. He gave the film no stars. He said, hey, I would want to get revenge on the person who killed me. And I would want to get, what the fuck, right? But that, unfortunately, is the story, as dumb as what I just said. That's literally what it is. Now, before I close, some of you have seen episodes in which I've discussed horror movies. I am an old school horror movie fan. Going back to my New York University days when I took a course called The Horror Film with a wonderful professor, David Legowski. I don't think he subscribes to the podcast, but if he's out there, what a genius. What a genius. And a great teacher on top of the fact that he probably has 180 IQ. But we read a book, the students in his class, we read a book called The Philosophy of Horror by, I think it was Noel Carroll was the name of the author. And he lays out his perception for what a perfect horror film should entail. There are 4 phases. He calls it a complex discovery plot. It's not enough for horrifying things to simply be taking place. There are 4 phases in a perfect horror film. And it doesn't mean the movie's good. It just means that by the structure of it, conceptually, this is what it needs to be considered a full-fledged horror film. Onset, discovery, confirmation, confrontation. Onset in Jaws is the Susan Backliney character of Sandy going out for a swim and the guy luckily passing out before he gets eaten by the shark. That is onset, is the first killing that we are made aware of. Discovery, they discover her body. There's a shark doing bad things. We think it's not a shark. Maybe it was sea urchins or whatever nonsense they try to come up with, right? The confirmation phase in a horror film. There's got to always be one character who refuses to accept that what's going on is going on. For example, Arnold Schwarzenegger's Predator, right? It's an action movie. Technically, it's a horror film. The confirmation in that film is Carl Weathers' character of Dylan. He keeps saying, there's a couple of guys going around out there. We got to take them down. Bro, you are facing an alien fucking predator. There's no couple of guys. A couple of guys have been killed, and then a couple of more guys are killed, and now your guys are being killed. When he realizes there is an alien predator, now it's time for confrontation. And in the world of that movie, it's up to the Austrian oak, 7-time Mr. Olympia, Arnold Schwarzenegger, to stare down the predator. Well, in the world of this film, the mayor, alas, the Murray Hamilton character, who's mostly unsympathetic, he keeps, in his case, I think he's full of shit. He's pretending that it's not what it is. Now, we're okay. That first small shark they killed, that's really the shark. Okay. The bite radius isn't nearly big enough, but you tell yourself whatever fibs you want to. Once he realizes how bad it is, how much worse it could have been for him personally, my kid was on the beach. Now we got to go kill ourselves a shark. And confrontation is the entire third act of Quint and Brody and Hooper out in the open sea, trying to figure out how to take down this monster fucking shark. It is a great film. I believe it is a movie that is timeless, that still plays beautifully today, even 50 years later. And some of the model work and, the practical effects and animatronics are not as great as they would be if it were done today. But this is a great film, a groundbreaking motion picture, and its success It paved the way for Star Wars. It paved the way for the big event movies, the big summer event movies, whether it's Star Wars, whether it was Indiana Jones. This was the forerunner. This was the first one. Somebody had to do it first. And it was Peter Benchley's novel, and it was David Brown and Darryl Zanuck deciding that Spielberg kid, that's who we want to make this film. Yeah, he's 26, but he's perfect. Orson Welles was only 25 when he made Citizen Kane. This kid he's gonna be our Orson Welles. I don't think they ever actually said it, but they sure as hell thought it. Jaws, released on this day, 1975. Happy 50 years to a movie that changed the movie business forever. This has been episode 570 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your Friday evening, sorry for my cat, here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, say hi, Sheldon. Same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. Sheldon and I will be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace.